different domains of digital flourishing, ranging from productivity, our kickoff panel, all the way to environment, physical health, mental health, quantified self, and beyond. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to your first panel moderator of the day. His name is Chris Flack. He is one of our teachers at the Digital Wellness Institute. He co-founded a wonderful organization called Unplug. And I will let him share a little bit more about his work and the other panelists joining today. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nina. Really happy to be here. Happy Digital Wellness Day, everyone. So welcome to the productivity panel. Today, we're going to be talking about topics around things like digital culture, digital burnout, and the always-on culture, areas that I think we've seen move just from duty of care in organizations more to organization effectiveness in the last year, which is great. So as Nina said, my name is Chris. I'll be the moderator for this event. We've got some incredible panelists today who've I've met before and I've learned a lot from already, but really keen to learn more from them and share their wisdom with you today. So I'm going to be introducing each person and then we'll go into the Q&A. So we have some questions that we're going to be talking to each other about, and then I'm going to be handing over to them to answer. So let me go through them as they appear on my screen. So Chido Mbavarira is joining us from Nova Scotia. She's based in Calgary, but at the moment she's in Nova Scotia, and she's a digital marketing and digital wellness consultant. She helps individuals and organizations foster digital wellness tools, skills and techniques so they can be well and work well as part of their professional and personal wellness strategy. She inspires companies and organizations to leverage their greatest people, projects, and programs in digitally demanding workplaces. Chido focuses on social-based science and behavior to provide digital wellness practices and solutions. Her background is in online business management, digital marketing, and digital wellness, which is the perfect trifecta for personal, professional, and entrepreneurship development. Welcome, Chido. How are you today?
Hi, Chris. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. You did such a great job outlining everything.
Wonderful. Really looking forward to talking to you with the Q&A. I'll now move on to the next person on my screen, who is Jonathan. Jonathan joins us today in London town. Jonathan in 2016 I'm showing my age now. 2016 was working as a digital educator, so working in areas like code, machine learning, really exciting areas like innovation, and observing the impact of rapid digital transformation in the workplace. He saw that while tech is really powerful, bad digital habits often end up blocking our human potential by reducing our happiness, productivity, effectiveness, and diversity. In response to this, he founded Mind Over Tech in 2018, a company that helps people develop habits and mindsets to unlock the human potential of hybrid teams. They design and deliver a digital habits curriculum and support huge clients, including the likes of Vodafone, Google, and the Cabinet Office. They also deliver public programs and recently published the Digital Habit Lab, a really cool physical toolkit of 50 experiments to help anyone take back their control of tech. How are we doing today, Jonathan?
Really good, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Chris. A lot's changed since 1916 in the world of productivity, and we'll look forward to chatting about that.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Lovely. And on to our last person, Mar. She's based in Spain, but today she is in the lovely Andorra. So although we all have these same backgrounds, we have very different locations. Mar Cabra is co-founder of the Self-Investigation, a foundation that provides a variety of services aimed at improving media professionals' well-being. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, digital wellness educator, and Acumen Fellow, working on raising awareness on how technology is changing the way we interact with ourselves, each other, and as a society. She writes a column in the Spanish newspaper El Confidencial on this topic. She's committed to creating a healthier working culture to prevent others from burning out, like she did after leading the technology and data work for the Panama Papers investigation. Great to have you here, Mar. How are you doing today?
Hello, hola. I'm really glad to be here and to be joining colleagues from all over the world, because it is important to talk about these topics, especially after 2 or more than 2 years of pandemic.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Right. So let's get into the questions. I'm going to start with quite a simple one, but hopefully there's a bit of meat on this. So what does digital wellness look like in the remote work world? I'm going to start with Chido on that, please.
Thanks, Chris. digital wellness right now is such a powerful tool for a lot of remote workers to have, because as we know, remote work is disrupting the way we work. And productivity is definitely one of the things that's on top of the list. And when I think of the stressors that come up while we're working from home, it's being inundated, right, with distractions because we're overcompensating from that in-person work. It's dealing with a lot of information overload when we have emails and Zoom fatigue and constantly responding. And we can see this in how much we do our task switching, right? How we're going from notifications and just being very reactive. So if anybody can resonate with kind of the perils of just trying to be connected and communicate with people while working from home, those are some key indicators of some stuff we have to be so mindful of as we work in this remote workplace era.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chido. I think I'm definitely hearing a lot more people saying they're reacting as opposed to responding just after all the additional multitasking and multi-screening we've done in the last 2 years. Great. Same question to Jonathan. So what does digital wellness look like in this new remote and hybrid world?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, obviously would agree with everything that Chido said, but maybe even zooming back one level from that. In a way, if we think about it, remote work, it contains all of the normal work we were doing before. It just we're doing it in a completely new environment, which happens to be digital. So in that sense, for me, digital wellness for remote work means literally relearning how to do everything that we were doing in our professional lives before the last few years, but relearning to do them in this new environment, which is a very strange environment because it's digital. It's very much there, but it's also not there. The boundaries are very worn down on it. So in that sense, in that zoomed out view, I'd say digital well-being in the remote work world is literally our day-to-day experience and having to redefine how we manage our well-being within that context.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think there's definitely been an increased focus. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've come across a lot more organizations just quite simply moving this from tactical to strategic, that whole thing of it being duty of care, kind of a nice thing to have, really more into a learning and development, long-term strategic objective. So wonderful. Thank you, Jonathan. Ma, how do you think digital wellness looks within this new hybrid and remote world?
Well, to add to what my colleagues were saying, which I totally agree with, what I would like to add is that what we're seeing is that when people are coming back to the office, they are seeing that all this craziness that we had in the past 2 years got to the office again. So it's like the bad habits of the office and the bad habits of the remote culture where everybody was connected all the time and we didn't know how to have a healthy connection with work and with our digital devices while working from home. So I think that we're at a key time in history. We're at a turning point where we've learned new ways of doing things, but for our own mental health and for the health of society, really, we really need to figure out a better way to connect with our devices when we work, because we spend most of our time at work. Yet still, well-being or wellness, or in this case, digital wellness, is something that we tend to talk about off work, right? So that's why this panel is so important, because I think that the workplace is going to be at the center of our conversation. And what we're seeing now is that the levels of burnout are at a historical high. The levels of people leaving their jobs are at a historical high. There's the Great Resignation in the US. And I would dare saying that a lot of that has to do with culture that is unhealthy, and the unhealthy culture is highly connected to bad use of our digital devices while at work.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think that cultural piece, we all know that's huge. And I think it's even just in relation to more around the resistance to return. A lot of the organizations that I've seen where they're struggling with that, I really put it down to the culture of the organization. And also just in relation to when you were saying people and their habits kind of almost the habits have become exacerbated in the last couple of years, and then bringing that into the workplace. I'm seeing so many cases where, because we've got used to checking our devices when we're on a Teams call or a Zoom call, people are doing that even more in real life meetings now. And yet we should be celebrating just being in a room and having those in real life connections. So wonderful. So on to the next questions. Which of our tech habits have actually changed during the last 2 years? So what do you think are some of the key changes in how we use technology and what's impacting our behavior? And I'm going to mix up the order here a little bit, and I'm going to go with Jonathan first, please.
I mean, a lot of what we see with the clients that we work with mean that, this reflects lots of articles which you'll have read online, mean that people are kind of, the boundaries around their tech use and their habits have eroded. And so their working days are essentially becoming longer. Even if they're split up into different segments in the day, overall, the number of hours which they're working are longer. And interestingly, I guess on a discussion around productivity, I think we all saw, particularly when the pandemic started, lots of reports of how, productivity was actually kind of going up. It wasn't necessarily that technology was kind of, or working remotely was making this difficult. But I think what's kind of important here is really around our digital habits and productivity is kind of actually looking at that word productivity and taking care to understand what we mean by that, because obviously there can be quite a toxic end to productivity. And I think a lot of the digital habits which I see at the moment around productivity are all about basically how can we get as much stuff done as possible during the day. And of course, that is one way to think about productivity. But actually, as I don't know if you've read a book called 4,000 Hours. It came out recently. It's by a great author called Oliver Burkeman. And in that, he kind of points out that actually it's impossible to get everything done. And the big kind of scam, if you like, of tech is that it sells us the promise that it can give us the solution of managing this unmanageable workload that we have. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, we can't get everything done in our lives. And so actually, for me, productivity and productivity habits are not about getting as much done as possible, but about being efficient at doing what you choose to do. And so I think this is the thing that we're seeing a lot, this rush to get as much done in the day as possible, but actually often taking a step back and reframing it so that you're not trying to do as much as you can, but to do the things which you choose to do as efficiently as possible is actually really helpful for that.
Love that. Thanks, Jonathan. I do think absolutely agreed in relation to like how we actually plan our days now is so much more important in relation to the difference between asynchronous and synchronous meetings, and even just how we manage our tasks. And that classic kind of, all of the media love the fact that productivity appeared to go up at the beginning of lockdown. But I mean, there are a couple of things that I think, first of all, it was a very different situation, which we never had a benchmark against. It was a hard thing to kind of have as a socially controlled experiment. But also what a lot of the science then showed was that our hours had crept up so much that cumulatively it had come down. And I think what we're finding now is it's finding that right blend, right, where some productivity tasks are maybe best at home, where we can have quiet, whereas we know that collaboration and innovation, all the science is showing we need to be ideally in rooms with other lovely humans to do that. So wonderful. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to go back with that same question to Mar, please. So what are the key habits that have changed for us in the last 2 years based on how technology impacts our behavior?
So what I'm seeing a big change of is a change in mindset, right? Before, I'm a journalist, and we've always assumed that a good journalist needs to be always on. A good journalist needs to be a good multitasker. A good journalist is a person who's always busy, right? And before, I was always told, this is the way it is, there's nothing you can do. But actually, the effects of the pandemic on not only our physical health, but also mental health are helping us shift the conversation. Actually, the self-investigation, the foundation that I co-founded at the beginning of the pandemic, was created especially because there was a shifting mindset, right? And I'm seeing that shifting mindset in many companies around the world. I was just recently talking to PwC, big consulting firm, who for the first time are putting well-being and digital wellness as a core aspect of their leadership trainings, right? And it is because we need to do this shift of like, we've done things in the past in one way, which we thought it was the way, but it is not a healthy way. So in that change of mindset and change of habits, we really need to incorporate a different way to relate to technology, and especially stop this constant bombarding of messages, video calls, and everything. It's like, come on, we cannot be distracted all the time. And to me, it's really interesting, all this research that has been done about the cost of interrupted work. And really, like, for those of you who don't know this, one, hardly anybody can multitask. So try to avoid multitasking. Two, try to avoid being interrupted all the time, because that's really not helping. It's not making you be efficient, as Jonathan is saying.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. I do think, yeah, that piece around the always on culture, it's incredible how, it was in our lexicon, definitely for us guys in our lexicon before lockdown, but it just became mainstream, and it was almost acceptable to get an email at the weekends during lockdown. And those habits have stuck, right? I've been in a couple of workshops recently where senior leaders, they're quite funny guys, have to admit, they basically said, okay, team, what happens if you send me an email after working hours? And they also, well, you reply and you say, is the patient dead? And I think for a lot of people, it's that awareness of, what is business critical? Certainly there are some situations, if you're working with, for example, Amazon and their services go down, that could be the back end of a hospital. So some things are absolutely mission critical. But I think everyone thinks that they have to be checking not only one device, but as you said, Mark, it's every single device, every single app all the time. Wonderful. Thanks for that. Chido, on to you, just in relation to the same question. Which of our digital habits have changed based on kind of key behaviors that have been influenced in the last couple of years?
I love everything that Mara and Jonathan said, and kind of a little touching on a little bit of everything is the mindset, because one thing that has changed is the way we gather. I think gathering now has to be very intentional. It has to be very output based, because if people can do what they are doing from home, bringing them back to the office has to have so much more value. And I think that even now that people are working more at home, they're still telling us the fact that people would rather work home and they're working more, they're telling us they really value flexibility. They value what they're doing with their time more than going to the office. They're willing to work more at home as long as they can control their time, which is so interesting, because that's the one thing I think people are losing more control of. So companies that are trying to get people back into office, and if they are prescribing to hybrid workplace, what they need to be cognizant of, they still have to operate as remote first. And when we say remote first, that's being, even if we have one or two colleagues that are not in the office, we still need to conduct ourselves as if we're remote, because you're going to isolate a lot of people, and a lot of workplace culture is not going to be very helpful if people don't feel inclusion. If they feel like, I'm not here in Toronto, I'm in Calgary, and I don't feel I am part of the culture, how do we gather those people together, even though we have this digital workplace? I think that's a misstep for a lot of workplaces that are seeing people experience burnout and productivity, because they're not mindful of how we're gathering and how our hiring, our promotion, and our biases are leaning towards those in office. And how do we make this opportunity available to everyone and make a culture that is remote first, that is inclusive? So inclusivity and gathering is definitely something that tech has helped bridge, but has definitely brought to the surface of how can we do this better as we are moving to this remote and hybrid workplace.
Wonderful, thanks, Chido. Absolutely. I think it's really interesting how, if we compare the workplace now to what it was 3 years ago, it needs to be a lot more attractive, right? It's the whole thing. It's so important for us to gather, but it's almost as if, we all know hybrid is very hard, but it's almost as if we need to overcorrect as far as what the attraction to the office is. So the idea of, getting people together and having really fun activities, whether it's doing improv or some sort of collaborative event where, they really are coming together. It's not all about work, because they know they can do work in another space, in a co-working space or at home. So that gathering, it's a very unique thing. So thanks so much for mentioning that, Chido. So I'm going to take...
Chris, Chris, if I may add, I don't want to I just listening to Chido came to my mind that something that is changing is that we're really realizing for the first time in some cases that we are dealing with people, and that not all our meetings can be transactional. Not all the meetings can be just about, okay, let's get this done, 30 minutes out, right? And the companies that are really advanced are the companies that are promoting more one-on-one meetings, promoting more meetings where human connection happens. Mm-hmm. Either if it's through a screen or not, where you really measure the temperature of the room when you're starting a meeting, right? There's this technique that I really like, which is the traffic light technique, right? Which is a technique where at the beginning of the meeting, just 3 lights, red, yellow, green, you can measure how people are feeling, right? And I think that we need to start incorporating more human aspects into how we work. And I think that that's what Chido was pointing at, is we really need to think how we gather and understand that we are human beings. And that has been a highlight to me also in the past years.
Yeah, I love that. It brings me back to that Sherry Turkle quote in relation to we've been expecting more from technology than humans. And I definitely think, during lockdown, we definitely felt that because it became so important, right? It was, for me, I live on my own in a country different from my family, and I'm sure it's probably similar to you and other people on this call. And I over-relied on technology a lot, but because it was so useful. And we now have to rebalance that and just remember how important the lovely humans are. So talking of humans, in the chat and in the Q&A, I see there was a question coming in the Q&A. So we do have a couple more questions we were going to ask the panel, but I'd love to start asking you guys who are listening for questions. And we have one here from Juan Sanchez, which is, we've been talking mostly about workspace, but how can we measure the impact of digital wellness on productivity there? So I'm going to go to Jonathan for this first, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is, a crucial question, as like measuring anything around wellness in the workplace is incredibly important. It's also notoriously incredibly difficult to do as well. I mean, wellness, if you just forget about digital wellness for a moment, just think about wellness generally. It's quite a subjective thing, right? Like kind of different people would say they feel well in different ways. So I think the first thing to say is that from my point of view, there are no kind of really clear, obvious, like easy wins around this yet. I think there will be going forward, but I think since so much of this, I think we've seen lots of articles again about kind of monitoring people's attendance in kind of different hybrid work situations, about monitoring kind of like, how much time people are spending. Like, these are definitely not ways to do it, right? This is not measuring anything about a digital wellness. For me, I think before we can really begin to confidently measure it, we need to create environments and circumstances where as a team and as a culture, we are regularly connecting and having conversations just like the one that we're having here today, where people can be open and honest about their own experience of digital habits in the workplace, and that they can understand what everyone else's experience is like. Because only when you start to have that conversation regularly in a way which is defined that that's exactly what we're talking about, only then can you begin to notice whether things are improving or getting worse. Actually, and so in that sense, kind of going with that subjective measure, but across the whole environment of your whole workforce and organization. So, quite often we will run journeys where we deliver kind of workshops and education sessions, but then they lead into a series over a month or two of kind of fortnightly check-ins where a team can just come together and talk about their digital habits, about their well-being, what's working, what isn't. And over that period of time, they learn from each other, but also people become a bit more aware of generally, okay, like everyone seems to be doing quite well this week, or actually quite a few people are suffering that week. And then you can begin to draw kind of, I guess, look for correlations or causes at that point. So yeah, in that sense, nothing hugely quantitative, which I would point to, but really setting up a culture so that you yourselves can begin to gather qualitative feedback and experience of where people are at is right now the most important place to start.
Love that. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, because I mean, the concept of social learning is so important. Wonderful. So Chido, same question to you, please. So we've been talking mostly about the workplace, but how can we measure the impact of digital wellness on productivity there?
And I always like to define words. So productivity, I know everyone thinks of how much we can get done. I think Jonathan spoke about that's kind of not the goal. I mean, if anyone here is in the entrepreneur space, hello, we have this busy badge that we love to glorify, how much we got done, how much money we made. And in the workplace, it was about showing up and working late, being the first one on site, being the last one. And we come from a culture that definitely glorifies this. But productivity, especially working from home, it's honestly not how much I can get done, but how quickly I can regain my focus. If I'm sitting and I'm doing work and I look at my social media, it takes 7 minutes to 23 minutes to refocus. So think of productivity as how quick can I protect my focus? So I love to have sacred time. It's not about having a to-do list as my productivity checklist. For me, it's about what can I schedule in certain hours. So I have golden hours, which are my deep work hours. I know my golden hours for the day because everyone's productivity time is very different. So know your golden hours and what outputs and what deliverables and what work do you want to do, and protect them with your life. Do not let anyone interrupt. Don't let life, technology interrupt your golden hours. And then those are the important and urgent tasks. And then I have my black hours. These are the important and not urgent tasks. I have to respond to emails, check in with colleagues, be social. If you work from home, it might be changing your laundry, cooking dinner, responding to an email. So those are like just stuff I have to do because I have to work. So I have certain times in my calendar where those are for those important tasks. And then when I'm seeing red, anything in red are about me taking a break. When I see red, it's also reinforcing to step away from the desk. It's reinforcing to go and look around you. Is the day beautiful? Can I take advantage of the environment? Can I take advantage of stretching? Can I do something that brings me joy? And I think productivity is not just protecting deep work and continue to work, but also seeing opportunities to rest and recharge within the scope of your day and your life. I think when I look at productivity in those kind of buckets, I'm really can see where the leaks are and what really stuff fill up my day and make me more productive as I work.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chido. So same question to you, Mar, just in relation to how we measure the impact of digital wellness on productivity.
So in addition to the great things that have been said already, I wanted to talk about what I hear in many of the workshops that I lead. A lot of people are telling me, yes, I need to just be on when I'm working and be off when I'm not working, but I can't. It's hard for my nervous system. They don't say it with these words, but it's hard for my nervous system to wind down. It's hard for me to go to this place that Chido was saying of rest and repair. And I think that to me, the best measure of productivity is, can you do that? Do you really, like when you stop working, is your mind off to the task that you're doing, which is probably not work related? Can you just like relax in the sofa? Or is your mind constantly like, I need to do this, I need to do that. Oh my God. So how could we create cultures where we really enable circumstances that help people be effective when they are working and effective when they're not working, and basically winding down their nervous system, which is key to avoid burnout. I know it myself. I was working 16-hour days and constantly thinking about things. And you know what? I didn't see it coming, but after many, many, many months with this bad habit, I burnt out and I had to quit my job, which I really loved. And we cannot afford more people leaving professions, especially in key professions like journalism. Journalism is key to democracy, right? So I need all the journalists out there to be at their best. We all need it, right? So I would say that's a measure for me. I think that what Jonathan was saying also about having these conversations is key. One of the favorite conversations that I love bringing to these workshops, these weekly meetups or bi-weekly meetups or monthly check-ins that Jonathan was saying, which we're also doing at the Self-Investigation, is let's discuss what's urgent. Because, research shows that urgency is relative. We all have a different definition of what's urgent, how quickly we need to respond to emails, how quickly we need to respond to chats. So I bring it into the conversation. We put them in small groups or even in pairs. Is it urgent? Are you sure? Are you really sure? And normally they're like, no, actually not. And then by talking about it and seeing how absurd sometimes our culture is, people start changing their mindsets, and that is key also in order to have a good impact on the productivity later.
Wonderful, thanks, Mark. And I think just to add to that, because I 100% agree with all of what you said, all three of you, just in relation to that thing of what is urgent. We've never sat down and discussed it, but we've also never discussed which different platforms we use when it's urgent, and that's obviously different for individuals, it's different for teams and different projects. And that's a key part of what we discuss within the Digital Wellness Institute on the various courses around productivity and digital wellbeing. And also just to mention, just to reference actually one of Mar's articles that I recently saw in relation to Viva Insights. So some of you might be familiar with Microsoft Viva Insights. So it's kind of behind the scenes, what on initial thought might be seen as monitoring by some people, but this is all anonymized data. And it's really, really interesting data. It's something that we can potentially use to actually look at productivity. So for me, a really simple signifier that I often use with clients in relation to the data they get from that. So it's checking how you're using different Microsoft tools throughout the day, your behaviors, reacting to things, how frequently you're working out of office hours, how frequently you're working with teams. And one of the things it does is it shows you how quickly you open your email after they've arrived. And for me, that is a massively powerful statistic because it really shows you that difference between reacting and responding. And if you can, obviously for some emails, yes, you may well need to respond if you're a journalist, you're trying to cover a really urgent deadline or, a mission critical system, whatever it might be. But for the majority, we don't need to. So it's the whole thing of finding a measure or a metric that works for you and then trying to work with that. But that's also part of that discussion, which it's great to hear that so many people are having.
Chris,
So, yes.
Thanks so much for the plug. Let me add another plug here, not to my articles, but the Digital Wellness Institute has this amazing playbook on how to thrive in this remote work era. And one of the tools that I use a lot and that I learned in the Digital Wellness Certificate that I took with Chris and Nina and others is that establishing a team communication charter is key. So it's when you're working in a team, it's like Chido was talking to us about what she does, right? Well, you need to talk to your team to see what are the practices that you want to have as a team. And the team communication charter that is suggested in the Digital Wellness Playbook actually is a great tool to start the conversation with your team and establish some sort of etiquette to really help us thrive in this era.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mar. So we have about 10, 15 minutes left. We've got another couple of questions here, but if anyone has any additional questions in the audience they'd like to put in the Q&A, please do put them in. We'd love to hear from you. So on to one of the next questions we have. What should organizations be doing as a first step to help their staff minimize the impact of digital demands on productivity? And I'm going to start with Chido, please.
This is something that I do when I work with teams. I'm usually coming in and helping teams acclimate to remote work. And the first thing is just even conducting an audit. I know the Digital Wellness Institute has their own audit. That's fantastic. But what was interesting, this audit was just asking people, your team, how are they doing working remotely? And that was such a powerful tool because when I meet with the team and we go over what people are going through, it is so interesting because it's so across the board. There are some people who are thriving and loving it, and some people who are honestly struggling. And for some people, they're not aware of the dynamics. There's not a space to share confidentially or openly and have that psychological safety to really say, I'm struggling. And I think if you're somebody who says a weakness, depending on your workplace culture, you maybe don't want to tell people that, the tools and the availability is not linear. Everyone has different ways they're working online. So just getting a pulse on how your team is acclimating to the remote work in general is where I love to start, because there's so much more empathy that comes across. There's so many people, your team's getting creative of how to help somebody who said, I don't have a great office space. And then the team is thinking about ways to go to an office store and supply everyone with some office equipment. So the creativity doesn't have to be done alone. It can be done with your team to problem solve what it can look like. And just as Mar alluded to, the communication charter is a superpower in kind of putting those digital boundaries of when is deep work respected? How best does the team want to communicate? Where are our distractions coming from? So auditing your team to get a pulse of what's really going on, and so people can empathize and sympathize with everyone's different realities, as well as implementing the communication charter is so important.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Chido. And just to add what both of you are saying there in relation to the playbook from the Digital Wellness Institute. So the kind of, I guess, the guidelines around the charter, it's not just having the charter, but it's also having the education as to why you're using it. Because quite often, we've seen the likes of big banks say they're having Zoom Free Friday. And if they don't put the work design around that, as far as educating people of the impact of why we're doing this, and they're particularly around digital wellbeing and digital culture. So it's really important to have that work design around the team charter, which the Institute playbook has. So same question on to Mar, please. What should organizations be doing as a first step to help their staff minimize the impact of digital demands on productivity?
Well, I think that there's like a divide here between countries where there's the right to disconnect in their laws and countries that don't have the right to disconnect. Let's just briefly talk about this. So the right to disconnect is a digital right that, depending on how the law has been drafted or crafted, basically allows workers not to have to respond to messages outside of working hours, right? So in some countries, actually, by law, companies are mandated to protect people's off time. I mean, one of those, Spain was one of the first countries to have a right to disconnect, or the right to disconnect to be put into law. And then that was in 2018. We're in 2022. The reality is the majority of companies are not putting it into practice, right? But because the law didn't put any sanctions here, well, companies are just not doing it, right? So I guess that for those who are listening to us who come from countries where the right to disconnect is a right in law, they really need to look at the law. They really need to have policy to implement it. And that's an obligation, basically. And what I would like to say, and in connection to what you were just saying, Chris, it's not so much about having a law and putting it into the regulation of your company. It is also about doing a lot of advocacy and education around it, right? So one of the best practices when holidays come is to actually have some information that you can share with the people that work for you about how to really disconnect, what they're expected to do and what not, right? I think it is really about being clear about expectations, and that's something that it's important. And those countries that don't have the right to disconnect into the law, why not start, paving the way? And I think that lastly, what I would like to say is that it is key to have leadership buy-in. I think that unless leaders really walk the talk, nothing is going to change, right? You cannot just say, yeah, why don't you take off holidays and disconnect? And then the leader doesn't disconnect on the holidays, then nothing's going to change. So yes, it's about showing also the vulnerability and of sometimes I'm not okay as a leader, and then also walking the talk about how to be productive in this digital world.
Lovely, thanks, Mar. And it's great that you mentioned the right to disconnect there, because some people might not be familiar with it. It is, I guess, in most jurisdictions around the world, it's at least something that's been discussed at a government level. So obviously France was the first person first country to drive that through. And they were the people who actually developed originally the team charters and communication charters. So that's where they came from. It wasn't really working in France. They're like, we need to have this for individual organizations and teams. And that's where that derived from. But as you rightly say, that we need the advocacy around that. We actually had the right to disconnect went live as legislation here last year on April the 1st. So we all thought it was April Fool's Day. But I think what the key thing in Ireland was it's quite a loose legislation, which I quite like, because what it does more than anything, it raises the awareness. So the conversation is there, and then people are able to build their own values and norms around that. So fantastic. So
Chris, yes. Chris, you are doing right to disconnect work. What's the website where they can, if we're a company interested, how can they connect to what you're doing on that front?
Yeah, so it's right to the number 2 disconnect.com. Thanks for that. One of the little side projects. Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. So Jonathan, on to that question for you. What should organizations be doing as a first step to help their staff minimize the impact of digital demands on productivity?
Yeah, so I mean, both Chido and Mar have shared really good points there, which have kind of which is very important, that place to start from the kind of the zoomed out view, like auditing what's going on, getting leadership buy-in and kind of modeling that behavior. At the same time, what's also really important is supporting individuals to give them confidence and a sense of agency that they can actually make these changes. And that goes beyond just having permission to do it. And it goes beyond that to the point of just feeling confident that you can do it reliably for yourself. So I guess to make the point, we've all heard of lots of great tips of things that we can do. Many have been raised in this session itself. It might be about not replying to an email as soon as it comes in. It might be about time blocking out so that you're protecting your deep work, whatever it is. I'd go to say that I'm fairly confident, and I'm confident because I experience this myself, that lots of people that are watching this have heard of lots of these things, but maybe struggle to actually consistently execute and do them for themselves on a daily basis. And so actually, in terms of really supporting within the workplace people with this, is actually giving them the tools and the mindsets for themselves so that they're confident to enact that. And so at the beginning, in my kind of intro, you mentioned that something that we'd recently published at Mind Over Tech was something called the Digital Habit Lab. So this is kind of a toolkit that we've made specifically to help with this. And it's interactive, and it's a set of 50 different experiments which people can run. So it's taking all of these things like what we've heard today. In fact, I just kind of, this is an example of like 5 of the experiments here. So just like even one of them here, the middle one, avoid your inbox until the afternoon, right? This is basically what we read about all the time. It's great not to just work with your inbox in front of you all the time, but to check it at certain times. But for me, to make sure that I actually do that, it helps to, rather than say, Jonathan, you have to do that, and then I feel like I failed if I haven't, I change my mindset and say, okay, I'm going to run an experiment. I'm going to try for the next 24 hours to do this and observe what happens and see what benefit I gain from that. And through that, actually, people can gain the confidence and the self-reflective skills to troubleshoot their own digital habits in this way. So really, in that sense, what I would talk about is, kind of getting people stuck into the nitty-gritty on a day-to-day basis of actually making sure that they are trying to put these things into practice, rather than it being a lovely strategy that was defined and they've given the tools, but they just end up sitting on the shelf and we're not actually doing them.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jonathan. It's such a practical kit that you have. I think it's an absolutely wonderful product. And thanks for doing a little bit of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids there. That was good. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. So guys, I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to ask one question, and I would like you to give like a kind of a 30-second answer, and also give your contact details so everyone can learn where to learn more about all of your wonderful offerings. So my final question is, what does your digital wellness day look like? So what's maybe one thing that you do to set yourself up for a really positive day when it comes to digital wellness? And if you could say that, and then what your contact details are, ideally in about 30 seconds, that would be magical. If I could start with Chido, please.
Great question. For me personally, is just having that quiet time when I start the day, not looking at my phone and not being reactory. And that's one of my sacred golden hours, is just making sure I'm really setting intention and setting the space. So maybe someone's not an early morning person, but that's how I challenge a lot of people to bring that kind of practice, because it really does set your intention for the day.
Wonderful. Where can people find out more about you, Chido? Mute.
Online at chidosmantha.com/bewellworkwell, and my social media handle is Chido_Samantha. So you can find a lot of my digital wellness shares there.
Great. Thanks, Chido. Wonderful. So 30 seconds over to you, Jonathan.
Great. So, following on from what I said before, I like to run experiments all the time. And today I'm running this particular experiment, which is put a sticky note on your phone screen. So what I've been doing is basically, I have this sticky note on there, and it actually has the word intention written on it. And so whenever I go to pick up my phone, you know that thing where you go to check your Twitter feed and you've unlocked your phone before you even realize that you've picked it up? For me, when I go to pick it up, it's actually got this Post-it note there, which is like a reminder for me, like, do I really want to do this? Is this an intentional choice, or is it something that I'm just kind of doing by mistake? So that's for this Digital Wellness Day, that's the experiment which I'm running today. In terms of contact details, I want to share this URL, mot.fyi/free course. So that's actually a free 7-day email course where you get one of these experiments I mentioned a day dropped into your inbox with some advice about how you can run them for yourselves. So that's what I'd like to share with people as a good starting point.
Great stuff. Thank you, Jonathan. Amar, over to you for your 30 seconds. Your one tip that you use and your contact details, please.
So my tech tip for today is actually to recommend people to do batch checking. So in the news, in the radio, we give the news once per hour, right? At the top of the hour. So what I actually do is I check my email once per hour, or sometimes it's once every 2 hours, following what we do with the news on the radio. And I recommend that you find your frequency and that you do it too, and try to do batch checking so that you're not constantly bombarded by what others need. So that's my tip. I recommend people who are in the media to follow the self-investigation at theselfinvestigation.com. We also have a course called How to be a Healthy Journalist in an Always On Culture at academy.theselfinvestigation.com. And I write in my column in Spanish called Tecnosaludables at El Confidencial, and I'll drop the links in the chat in case they're there, but you can find it on Google.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mar. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Mar, Jonathan, Chido, so much for your time today. Really, really fantastic chats. Thanks to all the guys in the background running this, so Beth, Nina, Amy, and Tyler, and the team. Thank you for tuning in to Digital Wellness Day today. What we've talked about here is just the beginning. So check out all the other expert panels at digitalwellnessday.com. Keep in touch with us and our work by exploring the resource links in the chats. There's lots of stuff that's been dropped there in the chats. Other year-round digital wellness resources can be found at digitalwellnessday.com, along with the recording of this event today. Everyone here has the power to be a change agent towards a positive digital culture, and we've all taken the first step just by showing up. So thank you very much for being here today, and we look forward to supporting you further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.